It's 11:30, so we'll go ahead and get started. We'll ask our committee members to be seated. We have two committee members that I know will not be with us today. Gordon Thames is out, and Jay Revel sent a text last night that he and his wife are at the hospital with the early delivery of their new baby. So Jay won't be with us today. Life starts anew. Yes, it does. Life as you know it is over. We've accomplished a lot in our meeting last week, and we've got a much shorter agenda today. So, as you will recall, last week was the committee's final opportunity to propose any new ideas for consideration. At that meeting, the committee requested additional information and analysis on two issues: water resources and modifying the elected status of select constitutional officers. So once we've gone over those two items, we'll discuss the schedule for our next phase of meetings, which are the public hearings. So our first order of business will be to approve the minutes. Do I have a motion for approval?
Motion to approve.
Second.
We have a motion and second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. All right, are there any citizens in the audience today that would like to be heard? If you would like to be heard, please fill out a card and bring it to us now. We don't have a very loquacious group today.
23 degrees.
Yeah, that's right. All right, so I do appreciate all the citizens that came last week to speak, and we will have more of them that will come to the public hearings. So we'll move on to section 4 of the agenda. I want to remind you that as a committee, we have voted to request additional information on two items. The county administrator and county attorney are going to walk us through each of those items separately, and then following their comments, the committee is going to discuss each item. At the conclusion of the discussion, we'll need to vote on how we want to proceed. And as the administrator and attorney will both explain, each item contains a series of options for our considerations. The voting threshold for these particular items to move it to the next step is just a simple majority of those present. So I'd like to ask our county administrator, Vince, to get us started.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. As the chairman said, this committee continues to move right along, and you've got a couple of items before you. And as usual, Herb and I will just mercifully hit the highlights on each of these. And the first one, as you will recall from your last meeting, has to do with the additional information that you requested on protecting water resources. As the item explains, the state has exclusive authority over water consumption in issuing consumptive use permits and that sort of thing. It goes on to talk about how the county and how counties may establish environmental standards related to water quality protection. The county attorney has provided a detailed memo for you on the state and county's responsibilities as they pertain to the regulation of water quality. And I know that Herb would be happy to answer any questions that you might have. As also included in the analysis before you, we talk about how the previous charter committee recommended amending the county charter requiring county-wide minimum environmental standards. That was a big thing at the time, and really probably one of the most substantive provisions in the county charter, in that it provides that the city may adopt more stringent environmental regulations, but it does provide for a great deal of consistency, and of course it reflects the fact that many of these environmental issues really should not be determined based upon political jurisdiction and that sort of thing. In 2011, the board adopted, pursuant to the charter, again, I should say that motion or that charter amendment passed overwhelmingly by the local electorate. The board adopted the minimum countywide environmental standard ordinance, which provided, again, for consistent countywide environmental standards. In regard to water resources, the ordinance increased the base minimum stormwater treatment standard by more than twice the state minimum. It provided consistent standards in drainage basins and study areas that fell into both incorporated and unincorporated areas. As noted in the item, 6 other counties address water quality in their charters. Their provisions are similar to ours. While more specific provisions could be added to the charter, adopting the local ordinance and regulations provides obviously for more flexibility for the county to be able to continue to address changing local conditions. As such, staff has provided in the analysis that while we will continue to evaluate opportunities to improve water quality, as we do on an ongoing basis, we do not have any specific regulations that we would recommend at this time for inclusion in the county charter. But with that, as a very high-level overview, we're happy to answer any questions you might have.
Any questions? If you have questions, if you'd please raise your card. Kim.
Is there a, Vince, is there a way to characterize a basket of water quality issues that should be addressed or could be addressed by the county commission, that kind of a backstop? I mean, the most recent controversy that I've sat on a committee was on sales tax committee, and we talked about a clean water district or whatever, where there would be a tax of all properties in Lynn County to support the improvement of sewer services in outlying areas that affect and impact our water quality the most, but where the burden of correcting it was too big for that neighborhood, like the Woodville area. And a lot of those neighborhoods aren't all that keen on actually switching from a septic tank to the sewer and perhaps encountering additional charges. And I don't know how to put it in a basket with a ribbon on it, but we should all be concerned about our water quality. And once it gets screwed up, it is really hard to correct. And the water quality of Wakulla Springs has improved dramatically since the city spent $260 million cleaning it up, sterilizing the discharge at the spray field in a short period of time, really just a few years. The water quality for nitrates is down from 80 parts per million to 10 parts per million. So that's a big gain, and the only single thing you can point to is the city's sewage treatment plant. So to that end, if there's anything that can be done to keep it, I guess, before the commission on a regular basis to review standards or issues or potential improvements, I think it'd be a great thing to add to the charter.
Well, Madam Chair, if I might, and Kim, yeah, there's a lot there, and you're right with respect to the city's work related to the spray field. I would also submit to you that probably keeping the issue before the commission in terms of their attention is probably, I would say, not necessary, only because it's on the front burner relative to this commission. We've taken on probably, and Alan, I don't know the number, but given that the spray field dealt with a lot of the nutrients related to the spray field runoff, as you note, another big factor there was the impact of septic tanks, obviously. And while a couple of different things, county obviously doesn't own those septic tanks like the city owned the spray field, so that's a little bit, makes things a little bit more difficult. But what we have done is really leveraged opportunities to go in and do neighborhood conversions, entire neighborhoods at a time. And we've probably taken on, Alan, you probably have it at on the tip of your head here, just in terms of the number that we've done, even in the last 6 months or have in the process.
Oh, we have over 600 neighborhood septic tanks through sewer conversions that we're in the process of pursuing right now, and then another 1,100 to 1,500 long-term with the Woodville conversion.
Right, so we've taken on probably half a dozen neighborhoods that we now have in the process of conversion from septic to sewer, where it's doable, where it doesn't require a large infrastructure layout, and where it's relatively compact and close to the existing system, that sort of thing. So we're knocking those off at a very good chunk. I think we've leveraged over $10 million here in just the last about 12 months in doing that. So that's good, very good progress. In addition to that, the board has set in our strategic plan specific benchmarks in terms of numbers of how many septic tanks we're going to be eliminating over the next 5 years, which is considered it's considered a bold goal of ours, or a stretch goal of ours to do so. But again, so you have a lot of issues. You have, you know, in terms of regulations, we're also in the process of considering, again, at what point, and these issues are actively before the board, in terms of when people would be required to update their septic tanks upon failure, new construction, those types of things. We put in new separation requirements for septic tanks, and we are actively evaluating pilot programs with the state of Florida in terms of alternative technologies to septic. It's probably not a surprise to anyone in here that that is sort of in its infancy in terms of finding a better alternative to septic and alternatives that exist in the spectrum between septic and sewer. The state, again, Department of Environmental Protection, is very actively exploring new technologies, and we're fortunate enough to be sort of their pilot partner in that regard, in that we are actively exploring, again, different technologies to sort of souped up septic tanks, if you will. So a lot going on in that area. Happy to talk about that, but I really, again, I wouldn't think, again, that it would have to be something that you'd have to keep on the board's radar, because they're very actively addressing it, both from a retrofit standpoint, a policy standpoint, and we are, again, very much in the throes of that, and I expect we will continue to be well into the foreseeable future.
Neil, you had a question.
I'd be curious, I guess, to get the perspective maybe of either John or David, if there are any water quality issues that the county faces that they think maybe aren't necessarily addressed by existing regulations or existing programs. You know, are there any things that currently are posing a problem or a concern either now or in the future that we might need to be looking at that aren't currently addressed?
Well, Madam Chair, we asked David McDivitt and John Cranack to both be here for that purpose today. So if you have questions of either one of them, they're both here. I see David's making his way to the lectern. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Hey, Neil. I think we're pretty up to speed right now with as Vince said, with the minimum countywide standards and doing away with those jurisdictional lines where we were applying multiple stormwater standards in the same basin. And the recent change to lake protection. Historically, lake protection had been a problematic area for stormwater quality, but with the minimum standards in place and recent changes to the comp plan, we've been able to enhance the way we treat residential development in the lake protection area. So nothing that we're aware of right now. I mean, we think we're pretty good right now.
One of the issues that's popped up in Calhoun County, to the surprise of some folks, was, exploratory oil well drilling in the Apalachicola floodplain. And then further to the west, issues with, proposals for hydrologic fracking. Neither of those issues are things that I'm aware of that are, that are poised for a problem for Leon County. But then again, I think 10 years ago in Calhoun County, who would have thought they'd be drilling exploratory oil wells there? So I'd be curious, I guess, in terms of either of those issues, again, from the perspective of county staff, are we adequately protected if those issues should arise in the next few years?
I guess it would depend on, again, as you talk about, Neil, what issues we're dealing with, whether it's an issue that's adequately regulated at the state level, who it is that are perhaps issuing the permits. I know, just to add to what you've said, some of the deep well injection issues we've been aware of, to our west. Fortunately for us, those have been, to this point, state permits and have required state permits and have not as yet impacted our jurisdiction. But David, do you have anything to add there?
Well, I think from a land use standpoint right now, we don't really have the land use designation that would allow that type of use to occur. So that's now. But of course, each year the legislature comes into town. They like to take over home rule on certain issues. So who knows what will happen in the future. But right now, as far as those types of activities occurring in the county, we don't have a land use that would allow that to occur right now. So, yeah.
Thanks, David.
Let me add to that, and I pointed this out to the folks who came on the Commission's agenda, I don't know, maybe a year ago, on the anti-fracking issue, that we have a case that we prevailed at some years ago. Neil probably remembers Colonial Pipeline.
Very well. That
was going to run a gasoline pipeline from Bainbridge to Lloyd. And it would have, in order to do that, it would have to cut through Leon County. We said, no, you can't, because that's not a land use that is permissible in the rural area. We litigated that issue and won. And so I'm very comfortable that that position, that is, you can't have a use that's not listed in our zoning code and in our land use element of the comp plan. And we made it stick, and they went away. I mean, Colonial, which was, I think, Texaco and Shell, something like that, they had the horses and the money to outspend us if they really wanted to, but the court was pretty clear that Chapter 163 authorizing us to have a comp plan and adopting it and saying these are the uses that you can have, and if it's not there, you can't have it. So I'm really comfortable with our position on the land use issues. By the way, in answer to Kim's question, is there a basket? Yes. This total maximum daily load driven concept, if you would, or plan, as they pick off the various water bodies in Leon County, the Wakulla Springs Basin was really the first. Actually, Lake Lafayette was the first, but it never went anywhere, so they're going to come back to that eventually. But for our purposes, there is a basket full of things that we have committed to do for the Wakulla Springs Basin. It's in the Basin Management Action Plan that we've agreed to do. There's probably going to be a similar one for Lake Talquin if we can ever get the TMDL finalized. That was DEP came out with a TMDL for Lake Talquin. It's primarily focused on the influence of the nitrogen from the Georgia border, but that will result in a Basin Management Action Plan also that we'll have to address. So while that's not in the charter, it is something that we're required to do, and it is something that we have committed to do. And so it will kind of by its own walk its way around the county into each of those. I'm thinking that they're talking about Lake Munson maybe next as one of the big ones to deal with. So I have to side with what Vince said. I don't know that anything that we put in the charter would prompt the county commission to do more than we're doing now, because it's been on the top list of things to do for at least the last 20 years. So I don't think there's anything to be fixed.
That's a good answer. Thank you.
Ted?
Thank you, Madam Chair. There's no question in my mind that we need regulations, either of consumption or pollutants or whatever might be affecting our water resources. The thing that I keep coming back to is, should we put it in a charter? I think the appropriate place for it is in ordinance. We know, just from reading some of this documentation that LaShawn did, is that it's a moving target. And you have different standards as you learn more about the science. So to put it into a charter means that every 8 years we have an opportunity to change it. I don't think that's the approach we need to make. I think we need to put it in an ordinance and go from there, because of its moving target and because of the ordinance would be more effective. And I'm not sure how you would structure a constitutional or a charter amendment to reflect the needs of our community today and in the future.
Catherine.
I agree with everything that's been said, but I would like to just clarify in deference to Commissioner Proctor, who brought this forward last week. What he had requested was a board, a citizens board, to look at water resource issues for this region. And everything that I have learned from this, we have no authority. Is that correct?
Not which overcomes all of these other state regulatory measures and water management districts and those sorts of things. No. And in fact, we actually have a water resources committee, which is pretty active. Now, it's not in the charter, but again, they couldn't do anything or adopt anything which overcame, for example, the consumptive use permit that the Northwest Water Management District would do.
Okay, well, that answers my question. Then with that, I would like to move option 3. We take no further action at this time. If staff is happy, then I'm happy.
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second. Are we ready to vote? Mm-hmm. Heather, if you'll call the roll.
Reginald Ellis?
Yes.
Michael Urick?
Yes.
Neil Fleckenstein?
Yes.
Bill Graham?
Yes.
Lee Hinkle?
Yes.
Shane Hopkins? Oh, sorry. Catherine Jones?
Yes.
Casey Perkins?
Yes.
Ennis Prosser?
Yes.
Ted Thomas?
Yes.
Kim Williams?
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
Okay, thank you. The next item we have is consideration of constitutional officer status. And Vince, you're going to take us
Thank
through
you, Madam Chair. Committee members, you'll recall that at your last meeting you requested staff to bring back additional information on making specific constitutional officers or offices appointed rather than elected. We've provided you an analysis at the state and national level for constitutional offices, which I hope you found at least pretty interesting, given the great diversity that exists among states and how they treat constitutional officers. However, the positions of sheriff, clerk, property appraiser, treasurer are most commonly found throughout the states. There are also offices that are unique to just a few states, as you have in your analysis. For example, the supervisor of elections, which is an elected position in only California and Florida. In your materials is a National Association of Counties report comparing these offices by state and identifying those which are elected versus appointed, which was a big part of the charge that you provided to us. Within our state, the vast majority of charter counties have preserved their constitutional offices. Only 6 counties, as included in your materials there, have modified at least one constitutional office. As requested by the committee, staff has provided a process by which these positions could be appointed if that change, of course, was made in our charter. As in other counties, these offices would be probably treated as department directors reporting to the county administrator. The county would establish criteria for the position as necessary to reflect skills and experience and education requirements. Then, of course, would go through an open and competitive process for recruitment and hiring. Again, this isn't a recommendation. This is just the process by which I think the committee was interested to take a closer look at. However, also noted in your analysis is the not insignificant fact that the Charter, the Constitutional Revision Commission, again, is considering a constitutional amendment that, if passed, would mandate that all functions and duties and method of selection of constitutional officers would be restored as originally prescribed in the Florida Constitution. So again, if any changes were made upon the passage of the constitutional amendment, it would require that these changes be restored to the original Florida Constitution prior to the 2020 general election. Lastly, I would note this is sort of my proviso language here, which is that, and I know the board is taking a bigger, broader look, but I always have to just note that we enjoy a very, very good and strong working relationship, very cooperative and collaborative one with our constitutional officers. And if there were any issues that we needed to bring to this body and to address issues that we're dealing with now, we certainly would. But with that, we're happy to answer any questions you might have.
Catherine?
No. Thank you so much. I really appreciate the thorough analysis. This is what I wanted to look at from the start and just look at and consider how it is done. Not only in Florida, but around the nation. I would like to go on the record stating I do not believe that we should ever allow a potential Florida Constitution amendment to control the way we as a committee choose to move forward. Just because the legislature right now seems to have a complete lack of concern, a lack of caring about home rule authority. That does not mean that we should bow down to every whim that they have. And keep in mind that this proposed constitutional amendment would have to pass, and then it would have to pass the voters. So again, just because the legislature doesn't care about the people's right to make their own decisions in their own county doesn't mean that we just bow down to what they want. Okay, having said that, now that was just my little ramp right there. I think that that we are very fortunate in Leon County to have some incredible constitutional officers. I think that our supervisor of elections is probably the most competent one in the state of Florida, if not the country. So I'm not picking on anybody. My whole point here was to look at three potential issues. One is that when people are elected constitutional officers, historically, they remain in those positions until they retire or die. My second point was elections oftentimes have the tendency to be popularity contests, and we never want important positions that control important functions in the county to be based on the electorate's inclination toward one individual as opposed to another. And the third is that once a constitutional officer is in their position, we as residents have no recourse if that individual does something wrong. So that was my point in bringing this forward, for us to look at it, to discuss it. Thank you.
Are there other questions or comments? Ted.
Well, I can probably restate what I said when this issue came up back about a month ago. And that is, I believe that this community relies on and expects that the constitutional officers will be elected, not appointed. I think we've seen that in the consolidation efforts that have been made at least 4 times in our community, in which the sheriff's office was looked at as being an appointed position. Excuse me, and there was a reaction, a negative reaction to that happening, and I believe it was one of the key things that happened to defeat those proposals, because we couldn't agree on and didn't agree on an appointed law enforcement officer. The other thing that comes to mind and that I spoke to before is I believe there's a degree of independence, and I can't see that the political body, which would be the county commission, intervening in how the property appraiser or the supervisor of election or the sheriff or the clerk of the court does their job. They are mandated by state law, and they follow state law. In the case of the clerk of the court, they collect lots of money, and annually, I'm sure, return monies. At least it did happen in prior years. So one would ask what the effect of the supervision by our county administrator have on that effect. I believe there needs to be a degree of independence. They report to the people in this community. I understand what Catherine's saying about the longevity in various positions, but if those folks are doing a good job and they're meeting the needs in this particular our community, then I see no reason why that's a reason why we should go to appointed constitutional officers. I think we as a community need to be free to make those decisions. I think our very foundation in this community and this county says that each and every time we want to elect our constitutional officers. We had a considerable turnout the last time, and I wonder what criteria Vince would use to judge and review the performance of the property appraiser or the clerk of the court. What kind of criteria would they use? They really are not in a position to administratively judge the performance in any of these jobs. I maintain that they just don't. They don't have the skills, they don't have the background, and there's no need. They report to the people in this community, and they should continue to report to people in this community.
Thank you. Kathy?
Yeah, I can't let all of those comments go by without making a small retort here. Number one, you will notice that I specifically did not include the sheriff. The people have never had the opportunity to vote on whether or not to elect or appoint their constitutional officers. Consolidation is a very different subject than the election or appointment of constitutional officers. Number two is I would think that county administration would use criteria such as someone who, I don't know, has been a property appraiser and knows how to appraise property and place value on it. I don't think it's rocket science in establishing a job description for these particular jobs. I think the same way that county administration has hired absolutely incredible directors throughout the county and function very well. I think they could handle this. I want to go on record stating I don't think that's an issue. I recognize that I'm probably the lone voice up here. To tell you the truth, if it was on the ballot, I would have to seriously consider voting for it or not. I just believe people have the right to decide, and it's something we've never put forth before the community. As for the electorate being able to determine if individuals are doing great jobs or not, I just say look over at City Hall right now, and you tell me if the electorate makes always the brightest and best decisions. Thanks.
Ted?
I just want to clarify a couple of things. I only use Catherine, the sheriff's example, because because I think it's indicative of how our community feels about elected versus appointed. I recognize that wasn't part of your motion. I've been in real estate for 30 years, and I know that the process by which one appraises property is not an easy process. And I would challenge Vince or the attorney or anyone who might have those skills to judge the performance of our property appraisers. The same may be true for the clerk of the court. What criteria are you going to use? How well are they doing their job? Gwen's right here. She might object to saying, you know what, I don't know if I want Gwen. If I want Vince Long looking over my shoulder telling me how I need to record documents and the time sequence that I need to do it. We're involved in that in real estate, quite honestly, because we use those documents. We use those documents to support our positions and to know that those things are done at the clerk of the court's office so that our clients can have those documents in hand. I wonder if Vince Long would be in a position to be able to make those judgments. So the community needs elected officials, in my opinion. And I move option 3.
Second.
We have a motion and a second for option 3, which is to take no action. Any other comment? Let's have the roll.
Reginald Ellis,
Yes.
Michael Urick,
Yes.
Neil Fleckenstein,
Yes.
Bill Graham,
Yes.
Lee Hinkle,
Yes.
Catherine Jones,
No.
Casey Perkins,
Yes.
Annis Prosser,
Yes.
Ted Thomas,
Yes.
Kim Williams.
Yes.
Motion passes.
All right, thank you. Before we adjourn today, I'd like to thank you for all the work that you've done throughout the process, and I'd like to go over the committee's schedule going forward. As reflected on the slides that you can see, the committee has addressed a number of issues over the last several weeks, and we now have the final list of proposed charter amendments for consideration at our public hearings. One is to increase campaign contribution limits for local elections. 2 is to provide a code of ethics requirement in the Leon County Charter. And 3 is to modify the hiring and firing of the county attorney. Because of our good work, I think we can accelerate our schedule by a week. So if no one objects, I'd like to recommend that starting next week, January 25th, we begin our public hearings. The hearings would begin at 6 p.m., and at the conclusion of our third public hearing, we'll have our final votes on each of the proposed amendments. And I want to remind all of you that it will take 10 votes, regardless of the number of committee members present, to advance an amendment to the county commission. We don't have a full committee today, but if we have 9 committee members at the public hearing, the last public hearing, we still require 10 votes in order to be able to move it forward to the commission. So I would hope that all of you would be willing and able to attend all 3 public hearings. They'll be here in the commission chambers, and we'll start at 6 on the 3 weeks following.
So we're going to have 3 weeks starting the 25th?
Next week, the 25th.
So you'll have the 25th, the 1st, and the 8th. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And they'll all be at 6 p.m.?
Correct, here in the chambers.
Okay. And I'm good for those dates. I just wanted to make sure I didn't have a conflict.
Okay, any other questions? Yes.
How long are those meetings going to be scheduled for?
Well, the
Whether
meeting,
Catherine talks. I'm kidding.
yeah, the meeting is scheduled for 6. We will stay until we hear all the people present. If we don't have people present at the conclusion of the last speaker, we'll adjourn. Other questions? All right, do I have a motion for adjournment?
Second.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.